In a revelation that is shaking the entertainment world to its core, leaked interrogation transcripts of Yu Menglong's manager have surfaced, exposing a web of secrets, fear, and shocking confessions that no fan could have imagined. For years, Yu Menglong's rise to fame seemed flawless, a tale of talent, charisma, and relentless dedication. But behind the scenes, a chilling story has now come to light, and it's far darker than anyone expected. Sources claim that the interrogation was conducted quietly by authorities investigating the circumstances surrounding unexplained events tied to Yu Menglong's inner circle. What was meant to be a confidential procedure has now leaked, revealing the manager's own words, a mixture of panic, remorse, and something far more sinister. The transcript begins innocuously, with questions about schedules, contracts, and public appearances. But as the session progresses, the tone shifts dramatically. Words like "they were watching," "I couldn't stop it," and "it was already too late" emerge, leaving investigators and fans alike stunned. The manager's statements hint at pressures and forces far beyond ordinary management responsibilities. He describes a level of control and intimidation that suggests Yu Menglong's career was not entirely his own. Cryptic mentions of mysterious figures, unexplained incidents, and threats that go beyond the professional world paint a picture that seems pulled straight from a psychological thriller. One particularly chilling moment in the transcript reads, "I tried to protect him. I thought I could keep everything in check. But they wanted more. They always wanted more. And I couldn't tell anyone what I saw." Fans have immediately interpreted this as evidence that Menglong's life was under some form of unseen manipulation, a revelation that has sparked intense debate across social media platforms. The leak ignited a firestorm online. Clips, quotes, and screenshots of the interrogation flooded Weibo, Twitter, and YouTube, with millions of fans dissecting every word. Conspiracy theories have exploded. Some speculate about rival factions in the entertainment industry, while others suggest connections to deeper, more mysterious forces. The consensus? Nobody is sure exactly what to believe, but everyone is captivated. The interrogation raises terrifying questions. 1. Who are they the manager refers to, and what power do they hold? 2. Were these events connected to unexplained incidents in Yu Menglong's personal life? 3. Could there be a conspiracy larger than anyone imagined, reaching beyond the entertainment industry? Experts warn that while speculation is rampant, the transcript provides clues that cannot be ignored. We are seeing a manager confess to actions and knowledge that suggest manipulation at levels rarely seen in the public eye, says a noted entertainment investigator. The interrogation took place in a windowless room. No cameras, no press, just a recorder, 2 investigators, and a man who had spent years controlling narratives, managing damage, and burying truths. At first, his answers were mechanical. Dates, schedules, contracts, public appearances. Then one investigator asked a simple question. When did things start going wrong? That's when the pause happened. A long one. The manager looked down. According to the leaked notes, his hands were shaking. And then he said the sentence that would later be shared across the internet like wildfire. It was the night he stopped sleeping. Pressed to explain, the manager described a period when Yu Menglong became unusually withdrawn. Not depressed, alert. As if he was constantly waiting for something. He kept asking me the same thing, the manager said. If I disappear, who controls the story? The investigators assumed this was stress. Pressure. Fame. But the manager shook his head. No. This wasn't anxiety. This was fear with direction. That phrase, fear with direction, would later trend on YouTube and TikTok, sparking thousands of theory videos. According to the transcript, the manager revealed that months before everything collapsed, he received an anonymous message. No sender. No number. Just words. You are managing more than a career. He deleted it. Then another message arrived days later. If he talks, you lose him. The manager claimed he never showed these messages to Yu Menglong. Why? Because I thought I was protecting him. I didn't realize I was doing exactly what they wanted. One of the most disturbing sections of the interrogation involves what the manager referred to only as the gatekeepers. He refused to name them. He refused to describe them. But he admitted this. There were people who decided where he went, who he met, what questions he could answer. And they were not on any official payroll. Investigators asked the obvious question. Who were they? The response chilled the room. If I say it out loud, it becomes real. And once it's real, there's no undoing it. According to the manager, there was a moment, one interview, one unscripted question, where Yu Menglong almost said something that wasn't approved. I saw it in his eyes. He was going to say it. The broadcast cut to commercial early. That clip has since been analyzed frame by fans, who claim Yu Menglong's expression changes just before the cut, from calm to alarmed. The manager's words? That night, I was told to remind him what happens when people forget their place. Near the end of the interrogation, exhausted and visibly distressed, the manager whispered a sentence that would later leak and explode across social media. We weren't managing his career anymore. We were managing the aftermath. No context was given. No clarification followed. And that ambiguity is exactly what turned this leak into a viral obsession. Within hours of the leak, YouTube creators began uploading hour-long breakdowns. Our Reddit threads reached tens of thousands of comments. Fans started mapping timelines, interviews, and body language. Old photos were re-examined for hidden signals. One comment went viral. If even half of this is true, then we never really knew him at all. Another said, this isn't about fame. This is about silence. Before the session ended, one investigator asked a final question. Do you believe Yu Menglong was in danger? The manager didn't answer immediately. Then he said, I believe he knew the rules. And I believe he knew what happens when rules are broken. The recorder was turned off shortly after. When the leaked interrogation transcript first surfaced, most people focused on the words that were released. But hardcore fans noticed something else. Something subtle. Something terrifying. A timecode gap. According to metadata attached to the leaked file, the recording jumps forward abruptly near the end of the session. No explanation. No annotation. No official reason. Just silence. Exactly 47 seconds missing. At first, skeptics dismissed it as a technical error. But then audio engineers online stepped in, and what they discovered changed the narrative completely. This wasn't corruption, one analyst explained. This was manual removal. Someone had cut something out, and whatever was removed was considered too dangerous to leave in. No one knows for sure, but leaked handwritten notes, allegedly from an observer in the room, began circulating days later. Though unverified, they fueled the fire. The notes included 3 phrases, written shakily in the margins. He wasn't supposed to survive that. We followed protocol. It failed. The internet exploded. Fans and analysts immediately locked onto that word. Protocol. Not decision. Not mistake. Not incident. Protocol implies procedure. A system. A playbook. And systems don't exist without architects. Several viral YouTube videos began analyzing the manager's posture and facial expressions before and after the missing 47 seconds. The conclusions were unsettling. Before the gap, defensive, controlled, evasive. After the gap, broken, compliant, resigned. One expert summarized it chillingly. Something was said to him, or by him, that removed all resistance. Almost as if he had crossed a line and knew there was no way back. Once people started rewatching Yu Menglong's past interviews through this new lens, patterns emerged. Moments once dismissed as awkward suddenly felt intentional. Pauses before answering safe questions. Repeated phrases like, I'm grateful to be guided. Nervous glances off camera at key moments. In one old interview, he laughs nervously and says, some things are better left managed. At the time, it sounded harmless. Now, fans say it feels like a warning. This is where the story takes a chilling psychological turn. A growing group of analysts began pushing what they call the manufactured silence theory. The idea that in certain high-pressure systems, individuals aren't just controlled, they're conditioned not to speak, even when the opportunity arises.
How?
constant monitoring, narrative rehearsal, consequence reinforcement, isolation disguised as protection. One viral post put it bluntly: you don't have to threaten someone forever. You just have to train them once. Here's where part 3 gets especially disturbing. In the interrogation, the manager insists multiple times he was safe. But then, later in the transcript, he says something that directly contradicts that claim. Safety depends on cooperation. Fans immediately caught it, because safety that depends on obedience isn't safety at all. It's containment. Late into the investigation, a single photo resurfaced online. An old behind-the-scenes image from a closed set. Yu Menglong is smiling, but his eyes are fixed on something outside the frame. Behind him, partially blurred, is the silhouette of someone not listed in the production crew. The photo was deleted within hours of going viral. Too late. Screenshots remain. By the time the missing 47 seconds became public knowledge, the narrative had already shifted. This was no longer just about a manager breaking under interrogation. This was about what wasn't being released. And, according to multiple anonymous insiders, there was a reason for that. Deep within online investigative communities, a term began circulating: the gray files. Not black, not white, not officially denied, not officially acknowledged. These were rumor documents that sat in a legal and bureaucratic limbo, sealed not because they were false, but because they were too disruptive. According to leaks, at least 3 files related to Yu Menglong were locked away under this category. Their contents?
No one has seen them, but people claim to know what they describe.
Unverified summaries, allegedly from someone who reviewed the documents, describe a pattern that's impossible to ignore. Repeated requests for temporary withdrawal from public activity, medical evaluations that were never completed, internal warnings labeled non-critical but sensitive, and one phrase appearing more than once. Subject shows resistance to long-term compliance. That single line shattered fans. Because it didn't sound like a celebrity assessment. It sounded like a risk report. At this stage, several psychologists began weighing in publicly, careful to speak in hypotheticals. One analysis went viral. The psychologist described a phenomenon known as condition compliance syndrome, a state where individuals appear functional, cooperative, even successful, while being psychologically constrained. Key indicators include scripted spontaneity, emotional flatness during high-stress praise, excessive gratitude language, avoidance of future-oriented questions. Fans immediately compiled clips. The match was disturbing. This isn't someone being controlled, the psychologist said. This is someone who learned when not to speak. Up until now, many viewers painted Yu Menglong's manager as the antagonist. But Part 4 complicates that story. Sources close to the interrogation claim the manager was once offered an exit. A quiet resignation. A clean break. No consequences. He refused.
Why?
Because stepping away meant losing visibility. And in systems like this, visibility equals survival. One leaked note allegedly written by the manager reads, "If I'm not there, someone worse will be." Suddenly, the manager doesn't look like a mastermind. He looks like a buffer. This is the moment fans can't stop talking about. According to an anonymous source, Yu Menglong once requested a private meeting, no assistants, no handlers, no advisors. The request was denied. Instead, he was offered a rest period. Industry language for disappearance without explanation. He reportedly responded with one sentence: "If I rest now, I won't come back." That sentence never appeared in any official record. But fans believe it exists in one of the sealed files. Once Part 4 hit YouTube, symbolism became obsession. Fans noticed recurring imagery across Yu Menglong's work. Doors that never fully open. Characters who smile while being watched. Repeated lines about owing time. One scene in particular resurfaced. A character pauses, looks directly into the camera, and says, "You don't escape systems. You only outlast them." At the time, it was praised as brilliant acting.
Now,
it feels like confession. After the interrogation leak went viral, something strange happened. Nothing else leaked. No clarifications. No denials. No follow-ups. Just silence. And silence, many argue, is the loudest response of all. Up until this point, the story had one consistent assumption: that the system was always in control. But Part 5 introduces a terrifying possibility. What if it wasn't? According to alleged insider accounts, there were multiple internal warnings flagged long before the interrogation ever happened. They weren't alarms. They weren't emergencies. They were labeled something far more dangerous: manageable deviations. Those deviations reportedly included refusing last-minute script changes, asking for written confirmations instead of verbal ones, requesting personal recordings of meetings, and most critically asking who had final authority. One source claimed a note appeared in an internal log: "Subject is becoming aware of structural limits." That line alone terrified fans, because awareness is the one thing systems like this cannot tolerate. Psychologists reviewing the situation pointed out a brutal truth. Compliance doesn't mean peace. It means delay. The longer someone plays along, the higher the internal pressure builds. And when release finally comes, it's rarely gentle. Yu Menglong, according to speculative analysis, showed classic signs of someone reaching that threshold: increased self-monitoring, emotional detachment during praise, sudden interest in legacy questions, a fixation on how stories are told after events end. One chilling quote from a past interview resurfaced: "People think silence is empty, but silence is full of things you're not allowed to say." At the time, it was poetic. Now it feels diagnostic. This is where Part 5 pivots sharply. According to fan-assembled timelines, there was a narrow window where everything could have stayed contained. One interview, one off-script moment, one delayed cut, and suddenly millions noticed. The system assumed the audience wouldn't look too closely. The manager would hold the line. Yu Menglong would continue cooperating. What they didn't anticipate: that he had already accepted the consequences. A leaked phrase, allegedly from one of the sealed files, says, "Subject no longer prioritizes outcome." That is not resignation. That is detachment from leverage. And once leverage is gone, a control collapses. One of the most disturbing theories to emerge is what fans now call the idea that the truth wasn't suppressed forever. It was simply scheduled too late to change anything. In this theory, warnings were acknowledged, but postponed. Damage was calculated and accepted. Silence was maintained until consequences became irreversible. One viral comment summarized it perfectly: "They didn't stop the truth. They just waited until it couldn't save him." Up until now, everything happened in shadows: sealed files, missing audio, controlled silence. Part 6 is where the shadows fail. Because once the public becomes the witness, the system loses its most powerful weapon: invisibility. The first hours after Part 5 went viral were supposed to follow a familiar pattern: a short attention spike, confusion, fatigue, forgetting. That's how it usually goes. This time it didn't. Instead, watch time increased instead of dropping. Older content resurfaced aggressively. New creators entered the conversation. Languages multiplied. Time zones blurred. This wasn't a trend. It was persistence. One analyst put it bluntly: this stopped being gossip the moment people refused to move on. Experts began pointing out a crucial shift in Yu Menglong's behavior before the exposure. Fear was no longer the motivator, because fear only works when someone still believes in outcomes. But according to speculative psychological analysis, Yu Menglong had crossed into a different state: witness mode. This is when an individual no longer acts to change their situation. They act to document it. Key indicators include careful phrasing instead of silence, symbolism replacing confession, calm during moments that should trigger panic, focus on how things will be interpreted later. In other words, he wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to be understood after the fact. One of the biggest misconceptions fans had early on was assuming this was a collapse. Part 6 dismantles that idea. If this were a breakdown, there would be chaos. Instead, there was precision. Timelines aligned. Messages layered. Silence used strategically. Certain moments left deliberately ambiguous. A speculative note attributed to a sealed file states, "Subject demonstrates intentional ambiguity to ensure survivability of narrative." That sentence reframed everything. Ambiguity wasn't weakness. It was protection. Here's the brutal truth Part 6 exposes. The system only works when the audience is passive. But once the audience starts connecting dots collectively, control fractures. Because you can silence a person. You can't silence millions interpreting at once. Every attempt to shut the conversation down only confirmed its importance. One takedown notice sparked 10 mirrors. One deleted clip created 100 breakdowns. The system wasn't built for recursion. After the interrogation leak, the manager disappeared from public view. No interviews. No statements. No denials. Fans initially saw this as cowardice. Part 6 reframes it as something else. Completion of role. Once he spoke, his function ended. He had transferred the burden of knowledge. And knowledge, once shared, cannot be recontained. A psychologist reviewing the full speculative arc said, "People assume survival is the goal. Sometimes the goal is witnesses. Not sympathy. Not rescue. Witnesses. People who can say, yes, we saw it too." Because systems rely on plausible deniability. Witnesses destroy that. By this point, fans weren't just reacting. They were archiving. Screenshots, mirrors, translations, timelines, offline backups. The story no longer lived in one place. It lived everywhere. And that terrified the system more than any confession ever could. Psychologists analyzing the full speculative arc noticed a critical transition. Early on, his behavior suggested hope, requests for breaks, questions about authority, attempts to renegotiate boundaries. But later, those behaviors disappeared. They were replaced with something else entirely. Symbolism instead of requests. Documentation instead of resistance. Calm instead of panic. This is often seen, experts say, when someone stops asking, "How do I get out?" and starts asking, "What will remain?" That shift is devastating and deliberate. One quote, pulled from an old behind-the-scenes clip, resurfaced and broke people. He says it quietly, almost jokingly. "If people ever really pay attention, it'll be after everything." At the time, it sounded like humility. Now, it sounds like foresight. A question haunted viewers. Why didn't he just say it plainly? Part 7 offers a chilling answer. Because naming names ends the story. But ambiguity lets it survive. When something is too explicit, it can be denied, litigated, erased, reframed. But when millions are left to see the shape of it themselves, the story becomes untouchable. One analyst put it this way. He didn't want belief. He wanted recognition. Becoming a witness isn't heroic. It's isolating. Part 7 explores the psychological toll of knowing you're speaking around the truth instead of into it. According to speculative expert commentary, this often leads to emotional flattening, reduced future planning, detachment from praise or blame, a quiet grief that never resolves, not despair. Completion. Here's the realization that hit hardest. Fans noticed that nothing in the story relies on a final revelation. No smoking gun. No final tape. No last confession. Because the structure itself is the message. Timelines. Patterns. Silences. Repetition. One viral comment captured it perfectly. If the truth needed him alive to work, it would fail. This truth was designed to stand alone. That's not an accident. That's architecture. Part 7 also marks a shift in tone online. The comment sections changed. Less outrage. Less theory. More mourning. People stopped asking what happened and started saying, "I wish he didn't have to be the one." That's when the story stopped being entertainment and became something heavier. Analysts noticed one last recurring detail across all the fragments. Every message, every symbol, every pause points forward, not backward. Not accusation. Not revenge. Not exposure for punishment. But prevention. as if the real audience was never the present, but the future. Not disappearance as escape. Not disappearance as punishment, but disappearance as structure. The theory suggests that the absence itself was designed to become the loudest statement of all. Because when someone vanishes without resolution, the system loses its ability to finish the story. And unfinished stories are dangerous. In traditional narratives, everything builds toward closure, confession, justice, redemption, explanation. But this story actively avoids all four.
Why?
Because closure allows systems to recover. A clean ending means lessons can be learned, responsibility can be addressed, the audience can move on. Part 8 argues that denying closure was an act of resistance. One viral breakdown explained it like this. If the ending is unresolved, the question stays alive. And as long as the question stays alive, the system stays exposed. By this stage, something eerie became clear. No official counter-narrative ever arrived. No definitive denial. No alternative explanation. No authoritative truth.
Just time.
And time, strangely, didn't erase the story. It sharpened it. Every anniversary, every resurfaced clip, every new viewer discovering it for the first time. The silence didn't fade. It echoed. Because once people recognized the structure, they started seeing it elsewhere.
Different industries.
Different faces. Same patterns. Controlled spontaneity. Gratitude masking exhaustion. Silence framed as professionalism. Disappearances framed as rest. Yu Menglong's story stopped being singular. It became representative. One comment that spread rapidly said, "This isn't about him anymore. It's about how often this keeps happening." Here's where Part 8 becomes deeply unsettling. Some theorists began arguing that the audience was never the primary recipient, that the real message wasn't for fans, but for others inside the system. A warning encoded in ambiguity. You are not alone. You are not imagining it. Someone noticed before you did. One analyst described it as a signal flare fired sideways, not upward. Here's the moment the system loses control completely. Every leaked file, every transcript fragment, every missing 47-second gap, every cryptic phrase. They are no longer just content. They are evidence. Evidence interpreted millions of times, reshared, translated, dissected, and archived. The audience isn't passive anymore. They're active participants. A viral comment captured this perfectly. We didn't watch it happen. We make it happen every time we talk about it. The story now exists because it's witnessed. Earlier parts suggested Yu Menglong may have chosen witnesses over survival. Now the theory is fully realized. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in archives or social media. Legacy is what continues to alter behavior, perception, and belief after you're gone. Fans speculate that every symbolic gesture, every controlled ambiguity, every paused gaze into a camera, all were instructions for how to watch, interpret, and survive the system. The reason this story resonates so strongly is that it exposes an uncomfortable truth. Systems function best when obedience is invisible. Systems function best when silence is maintained. But a single crack, amplified by witnesses, destabilizes everything. In Part 9, experts say this story becomes a case study in indirect resistance. One viral analyst summarized, "You don't have to overthrow a system to break it. You just have to make it accountable to millions who are never supposed to know." By this point, the manager is no longer the villain. He is the buffer, the intermediary, the one who absorbed the system's immediate pressure so the truth could persist. When he spoke, the ripple started. When he remained silent after, the story spread. Some viewers called him a tragic hero. Others called him a witness trapped in a system too complex to leave. Fans now realize the story isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror. Every repost is participation. Every analysis is interpretation. Every question asked is reflection. The system intended control, but the audience became its reflection. The phrase circulating online, "The system never fails. It only meets its witnesses." Many viewers expected a final reveal. A name, a document, a confession.
A tape. But none came. And here's why.
Proof can be dismissed. Proof can be buried. Proof can be reinterpreted. But patterns cannot. Patterns live in memory. Patterns spread through repetition. Patterns change how people watch the next story. One analyst said it best. He didn't leave evidence. He left a way of seeing. The final revelation isn't about what Yu Menglong did. It's about what he changed. After the story went viral, audiences began to notice. When interviews felt rehearsed. When silence was framed as gratitude. When disappearances were explained as rest. When control disguised itself as care. The system didn't fall, but it was seen. And once a system is seen, it must behave differently. There is no triumph here. Only cost. Part 10 makes it painfully clear. Becoming a witness, especially the first, is not heroic. It's lonely. It's irreversible. And it often benefits everyone except the person who initiates it. Which is why this story feels heavy. Because deep down, audiences understand. He paid the price so others could recognize the structure. No final statement was ever issued. No official closure arrived. And that silence? That wasn't failure. That was the last message. Silence, once recognized, stops being empty. It becomes a question mark that follows every polished narrative afterward. The reason this story continues to trend years later, across platforms, across languages, is because it doesn't belong to the past. It belongs to every system that depends on silence today. Every time someone pauses mid-sentence. Every time an answer feels approved. Every time a disappearance feels too clean. The story activates again. The last line attributed to Yu Menglong, unverified, but endlessly shared, reads, "If you're reading this carefully, it means it worked." Worked how? That's the final realization. The story doesn't end with him. It ends with you noticing. And once you notice, you can't unsee it.